screaming. Yeah.
Hey, Polly, you can come down, or wash your hands and come down to the driveway. We're going to eat a little picnic out in the driveway for lunch, okay? And anyone else upstairs can wash hands
Hey,
and come
gang.
out to the driveway.
Welcome. Thank you for joining me. I give a few other people a few minutes to catch up with all you fasty people. You people who are fast, that is to say. So I've been working for a little while. Let me take this off just for a minute. All this is dry. This is acrylics underneath, oil on top. Most of what you see here is acrylics. The only thing that's oil is the blue sky and this building right here. Everything else is underpainting. So I've been working on, and all that was done yesterday, so this is all dry. It's oil paint, it's done yesterday and it's dry, of course, because I use a lot of liquid. Here's a jar of liquid. There you go. The label's all besmirched, but you can still see it. Hello, Michael McEwen. Good to have you here. All right, and I actually have some Facebook people here as well. I got some screaming, yelling kids.
Hello, Michael McEwen. Good to have you here.
We try to. I got sound coming from somewhere, and I'm not sure where. Hello?
I've got some screaming, yelling kids. Hello. We try to.
That's strange.
Got sound coming from somewhere, and I'm not sure where. Hello.
Bear with me just a second. There we go. I think I got it. All right. Let's see. Hello, Melissa. Melissa McKay, again, watching me. A little pressure. Good to have you. All right. So this is a Daily Art Adventure number 889. On this clapperboard, I'm just calling it Realism versus Beauty. What in the world could that mean? All right. So obviously I'm focused on this issue, and I think I can zoom in here quite a bit. I'm focused on this issue that I talk about quite a bit. First, before I start ranting and raving about interesting marks and all that, let me say that if you are wanting to paint realistically, if you like and enjoy realistic painting and that's your goal, then bless you, go for it. There are a lot of people that love that, and I enjoy, honestly, every once in a while, I love doing some super realistic stuff. The last 3 weeks I've been doing portraits, right? The faces are all, would fit that category of realistic. All right, so I'm working on, let me pull this off again. Melissa, I don't know if you saw this. Oh, here, let me back up so you can see at least most of the painting. Ah, Scott's watching too. Now the pressure's on. All right, everything you're seeing here is to the rest of you, Scott and Melissa. Scott is the one who's buying this painting. So let's review a little bit. Let's move it down so you can at least see most of the painting. Hang on, I'm going to get it adjusted right. Just a second. And now both cameras are not pointing in the same direction, so bear with me just a minute. Yes, sirree. I have two cameras. All right, close enough for now. I had a delightful time doing the acrylic painting. Can't wait to do more. Yesterday, for the first time ever, I actually used a masking technique in the acrylic phase. I put tape on various parts of this painting, and then to mask, and then painted, and then took it off, then put more mask on, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I'm quite happy with the result. I'm quite happy with the acrylic painting. Now, of course, I'm down to, what do you call it? the the hard work. I'll just leave it there of finishing the painting in oils. All right, so I did this building yesterday. This is the second most important building in the whole painting. So the whole painting is not going to be done to the same degree of detail as this. This is, I believe, the most important face plane building in the painting, and that's why I'm working on it right now. So and I've got the photograph here. This, for anybody new watching here, this is the main street in our fair city, Raleigh, North Carolina, called Fayetteville Street. I took several pictures, sent a couple to Scott, and then edited this in Photoshop. So in a sense, my sketch here is all done in Photoshop. And let me say right now, I don't obligate myself to broadcast necessarily for hours and hours and hours, as you know that I awful. Well, hello, Marlo, Richard. I'm just surrounded by friends. Richard, Marlo, Lorraine. Oh my goodness, how fun! And Philip Daniel. I do not know Paul Rhodes. Ooh, thank you for that tip. I'll have to look him up. Huh. All right. Yeah, the tension. That's a good word. The tension between. Philip is telling me on YouTube. Do I know Paul Rhodes? He talks about the tension between the illustrative and the decorative. It's exactly what I'm talking about here. So I called it, was being pompous, of course, I called it the eternal tension between realism and interesting marks is my most typical name for it. And I've been working on this building for maybe 30 minutes, maybe. I'm right in the middle of the hard work of it. I'm neither worried nor relieved. It's just like I'm not to the point like, oh yeah, there we go. Now it's cooking. You know, I'm not there yet. It's like I'm trying to get it cooking. I will. I'm not worried about it at all. This is pretty familiar territory, but honestly, when it comes to what Paul Rhodes evidently calls the decorative end, there's just no end. The tension never lets up. Oh, by the way, so one of the tools I'm using is a credit card, or in this case, a gift card. Let me do some of that again, just in case you missed it. So it's like actually in many ways, it works better than a palette knife sometimes. Scott and Melissa, I have described this watching a painting being made, well, maybe not a painting, but for a portrait. It might be like the old saying that if you enjoy sausage, don't watch it being made. There might be a rough correlation to painting. If you like the painting, it might be painful to watch it being made. I'm not sure. I'm kidding. You guys are totally used to it. Move this for a second. So a quick list of the tools that I've used just on this building in the last 30 minutes. 6 brushes, no big deal, a rag, a palette knife, a credit card, T-square, and my thumb and fingers. So not to sound too much like a broken record, but for you regulars, painting something realistically is easy. All you do is look and copy. Now I know, forgive me, I know that sounds a little bit arrogant because some of you are saying, but well, it's not that easy. Okay, right, I know, okay. it's a different kind of thinking, and it's, I make the comparison often like to doing a jigsaw, 1,000-piece or 1,500-piece jigsaw puzzle. To people who hate jigsaw puzzles, that's very difficult. But to people who love jigsaw puzzles, it's not difficult, it just takes a long time. But it doesn't, I don't think it weighs on the mind as, ooh, this is hard. If you love jigsaw puzzles, that is. And if you don't, then that would be very hard. Anyway, I think that's the way realism is. For those who enjoy it, it's not hard. It does take a long time. It takes a lot of concentration, takes a lot of so on. But what is hard, so, and this sounds self-serving, I don't mean it to sound that way, but what is difficult, truly, is not the illustrative, the copying, the realism. What's hard is the elusive, intangible, intuitive, again, it's what somebody else evidently calls decorative. I usually use the term interesting marks. The full phrase, the full quote is the most important aspect of, no, the most important part of painting is making interesting marks. No, I'm sorry, the essence of good painting. There we go, that's my usual. I say things the same way, by the way, for you, either you people who are just joining me. I have these Dan Nelson phrases that have emerged over the years, not because I can't think of new stuff, but because it's a teaching device. I think I know a little bit about pedagogy and how people learn, how people think. And so by repeating the same things over and over and over, and I hear it from my viewers all the time, they make jokes about, you know, their inner Dan Nelson or their Dan Nelson being stuck in their head. They hear my voice in their head, and I think that's a good thing. The best teachers I've ever had are those teachers who got stuck in, I could hear their voice, so I would hear their expressions over and over and over again, because that helped me stay on track. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see what I just did. I just picked up a rag and made really a pretty big mess. And this is indeed what I want you to see. I won't be done with this building, or yea, verily, even this part of this building. And by the way, I think it's obvious. This side's in the shade, this side's in the sun. There you see it in the photograph. Although that's photoshopped in, by the way. It wasn't, in reality, it was not that way. The sun was hitting the whole building. We've talked about that before. If there are any painters out there, any besides Melissa, watching me, then, okay, I want you to raise your right hand. It's part of my little joke. Raise your right hand, say, I do solemnly swear, that I will never again, paint the flat side of a building, without a shadow going across it at some angle. All right, now, of course, I'm being pompous and mildly humorous. I'm exaggerating, but again, for pedagogical purposes, I want you to say that because I want you to understand that principle. Now, I think it's partly because I have learned that principle far too late in life, I might add. So I wish somebody had made me solemnly swear like 20 or 30 years ago. I promise I would have paid attention. But anyway, I think it's because I do so much architecture, because I paint so many buildings, that I've learned. In fact, I'll tell you the one moment that it really popped into my head is about 4 years, no, yeah, maybe 4 years ago, maybe 3. I was painting with my good buddy, Mike Rooney. Some of you know, and if you follow me at all, you hear me mention his name. periodically, because Mike's probably my #1 painting buddy. Yeah, no, I think that's pretty safe to say. So every year for the last 6 or 7 years, Mike and I get together and paint for a week. Okay, so I don't do that with anybody else. So he's my painting buddy, and we just get along. There's a chemistry there. He's a good painter. He's a hardworking painter. And most of the time we paint in Ocracoke, North Carolina. And there's a building there. I won't go into any more than that. It's very familiar. Anybody that's been to Ocracoke would recognize this building. And I've painted this building, golly, probably 4 times, maybe. And to various degrees of success, you know, okay. And then, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, Mike painted the same building. And just imagine the front of a building, and it's got a peak like this. Just picture it like that. Doesn't matter, that's all. And he manufactured, out of thin air, a diagonal shadow that went across the front of that building, just like this. Boom. And when I saw his painting, again, I think it was partly because I'd already painted that darn building over the years, you know, 3 or 4 times. When I saw his painting, it was like, you know, the scales fell from my eyes, the cloud, the sky parted, the angels sang, the birds sang, whatever. You know, it was one of the like, moo. That's the sound of revelation. Oh my goodness, because his painting beat the pants off all the paintings I had done of that building up until that point. And so I just said, you know, I ain't stupid. Well, maybe I am stupid, but anyway, I'm not that stupid. I ain't stupid. I said, file that away. And that's when I took the oath. Raised my right hand, put my left hand on my paint palette, and said, I do solemnly swear that I will never again, paint a building that does not have an angle. So here it is, right there. And it's going to be, and it's going to look great. It's going to look fantastic. So much better than if the sun was hitting this whole building. And this is the main building. All the other buildings, like here's a plane right here, and it will be much more subtle on this building. But anyway, that's enough. That's enough. I'm going to move on. So while I'm talking to you guys, as you can see, I'm messing quite a bit with I really like what happened with that last rag drag. That's a good expression. That last rag drag across that really made this start to work. It's finally starting to work. I'm not very happy with this up here, so at the risk, you know, just because you do something once and it works doesn't mean you can do it again, it's going to work again, but be that as it may. Here's another. This is not quite a, this is not, does not come quite to the level of I do solemnly swear. I don't know why. Every time I say that, I take on a Massachusetts accent. It must be some subliminal John Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you. I don't know. Anyway, I accidentally channel John Kennedy every time I do solemnly swear. Anyway, this doesn't quite rise to that, but here's a good tip anyway. Again, this only applies to those of you who are trying to do beautiful painting, not realistic painting. Not that realistic painting doesn't have its own particular charm. It does, but it's not the same. Anyway, so those of you who are trying to do beautiful painting, generally speaking, every mark that you put down with a brush you should mess it up somehow. Now, that's not quite a one-to-one correlation, but pretty darn close. I think if you watch me, you'll find me doing that more often than not. Now, let me point out something that makes it, what, a little safety net, little parachute for you. So you saw I just took one of my most common is because I've got a brush in my hand, I'll turn the brush around and scratch, okay? And part of the safety net here is like, oh, okay, I like the scratch, I like what it did up there, but this is too much of a good thing. Here's the safety net. It's very easily healed, patched up, covered over. Now, I'm not sure I want to cover up all of it. Okay, so that's part of the, what do you mean I'm supposed to make a mess? Yes, so let me say it this way. Basically, with every brush stroke you make, you should make a mess, a corresponding art mark or messy mark. Now, sometimes, of course, I make the representational mark like this right there, right? That wasn't very artsy, that was representational. But now, the end of that stroke was decorative, as evidently some artist named Paul Rhodes. Thanks for reminding me of that, Philip, because that is, I've heard that terminology before, but I had forgotten it, and that is very, very helpful. So I'm crawling my way, as you can see. Well, I'll tell you what, before I crawl away completely from this, from this upper left-hand corner, because I like this quite well, but not quite well enough. There's an expression. I like it quite well, but not quite well enough. Because this part right here, the lightest, brightest corner is not quite light or bright enough. Now it might be. There we go, there we go, there we go. Speaking of palette knives, I think everybody, all early journey painters, every early journey painter should do one palette knife painting, because it's a good way to learn the tool. And after that, just go back to painting and use a palette knife as a tool. To me, more often than not, I did this entire painting with a palette knife is sort of gimmicky, sort of an adolescent impulse. I mean adolescent in your painting life, kind of a young impulse. Yeah, do that. Get it out of your system. And forgive me, I know, because there's some people who are famous and so on and so who've made an entire career out of palette knife paintings. Okay, I know, but nah. Okay, so maybe I'm being, with that statement, maybe I'm being a bit of a snob. Anyway, palette knife, great tool. That's all it is a tool. It's not like mystical, magical, wonder, anything. It's just a tool, All right. But just a little bit more about palette knives. Palette knives. Little trivia question. What is the lightest, brightest, whitest mark that you can put on a canvas, on a painting? Well, one answer would be, well, I guess pure titanium white, right straight out of the tube. And the answer is yeah, technically speaking, that would be the lightest, brightest mark you could put on a painting. But, there's a big but coming, but if you warm up that titanium white a little bit, by the way, I'm being really dangerous here. If you warm it up a tiny bit, so it's a warm, slightly warm white, it will actually usually appear slightly lighter, brighter, whiter than pure titanium white. No. All right, so I'm just going to let that statement stay there for a moment, because then the rest of the answer, what is the lightest, brightest, whitest color that you can put in a painting? And the short answer is warm white. So titanium with just a tiny, 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 tiny bit of some kind of yellow in it, like yellow ochre, to make it warm, because then it proceeds toward the viewer. Applied with a palette knife. So that right there, it's not perfectly white. It's actually marbled a little bit, which I like. But that's brighter than you can get with a brush, because a brush leaves grooves, right, because of the hairs, whereas a palette knife leaves a mirror finish. So there's the answer to that question. And yes, this spot right here is probably going to be the lightest, brightest, whitest point spot on the whole canvas. Okay, let me pull this down. Being the competition would be, the other place would be down here or somewhere in the sky. Theoretically, you know, the sky should be lighter than anything in the scene, except unless the sun is low, which it is. The sun's about at that angle. And if the sun coming in at that angle is hitting a light or white building, then that will be lighter than the sky. So I'm sorry, I'm getting into more detail than some of you need or want, but there you go. So, but generally speaking, in a landscape, generally the rule of thumb is the sky is always the lightest object. But when you're doing architecture, the rules get changed a little bit, because many times, like this, the architecture is straight up and the light's coming at an angle. All right, way to go, Melissa said the pledge. Melissa took the pledge. Good for you. Thanks, Liz. Yes, of course. The painting is supposed to be a lot more interesting than the photograph. Ah, I just realized one of the struggles I'm having here is because of the photograph. So, to heck with the photograph. In the photograph, this, I don't know what you would call this ledge that comes out from the building is very brown. It's quite dark. So when the sun is hitting it, the light's getting absorbed and it's a dark. But in the painting, it's not making any sense. It's not making sense to the viewer. Does that make sense? Because the viewer's going, that doesn't make sense. This should be light. So I'm glad I figured out why am I struggling with this so much? Okay, the answer is because I was being too influenced by the photograph. Does that make sense? So now, visually, now a viewer can look at this, because of course when Scott puts this on his office, I doubt very much that he's going to take this photograph and put it on the wall next to the painting. So people, right? So the goal is not to, I'm not asking people to give me a grade for how quote unquote good a job I did at capturing, because then they could say, wait a minute, that thing's supposed to be dark, right? But this picture won't be here, so they won't know. And now it's making more sense. And I've been struggling with that for quite a while, because I was inadvertently being too much influenced by the photograph. And that is one of the classic blunders with our monthly painters group. We've been getting together for about 13 years, and that is one of the things we see most often, one of the things we laugh at each other about, because we all take turns falling into that trap. You know, somebody will put up a painting. This is our monthly painters group. Somebody will put up a painting, and people say, "Why'd you do what's going on right here? Why'd you do that?" And then, if it's a regular, they'll, like myself, I'll typically, you know, palm to foreheads, like, "Oh, good grief," because as soon as they ask the question, then the answer goes, "Well, that's because that's what it was in the photograph," and that's what we all are learning. I still think it's probably still the #1 mistake that I tend to make in my paintings is being too influenced by the realism impulse. And some of you, and again, take that in context, because I'm saying that, and most of you would say, what? You're not realistic at all, so to speak. I very much hope not to paint this entire painting this slowly. I really am struggling a little bit with this face. Again, I'm not worried about it. I will keep messing till I get it right. And again, I don't obligate myself to keep broadcasting till I get it right either, because I've already, I think, given you a fair, anybody who's a painter who's watching me, I've given you a fair insight into the authentic process and struggles of this subject of realism versus beauty versus interesting marks versus abstraction. Okay, there absolutely is a beauty in realism, in representational, and that's why, again, I don't make any apologies. My painting is essentially a realistic painting, essentially. But for those of you who are really stuck in realism, my painting is very disturbing to you, because you're saying, wait, how come you have drips running down? How come you have a red streak going through the building up there, and 1,000 other things? The more you look, the more less realistic it becomes. All right, so now you know, even though I'm definitely, it's realism, but realism is second in importance. The essence of the marks themselves is paramount. I am going to do just a little bit more, and then paint by myself. I'm finding, for some reason, I'm finding myself more distracted than normal. No big deal. In fact, honestly, right? Most of my broadcasts go on for hours. That's why I don't have very many viewers. I understand. Believe me, I'm not. 10 minutes is the perfect YouTube video length. Probably Facebook too. Maybe even 4 minutes. So when somebody sees that this feller droned on for 2.5 hours, they say, not today, thank you very much. But while I'm doing the mullions in this window, these little dividers, let's talk about another principle. That's a favorite of mine, and it comes up so often in architecture. All right, here it is. Anytime that there's a highly repeated, if there's an object or a shape that appears many times in your scene, in your subject matter, you must come up with several different techniques for rendering. So, in other words, the classic, here it is. This is a classic, again, for me, doing architecture. The mullions, that's what those are called, the little lines in the window there. There's 3 windows here and 3 more down here. These are too much in the shade, so maybe they won't count. But just those 3 windows right there have this repeated motif, I call it. If you paint them all the same way, with the same technique, then you are inviting boredom. The chances are your painting is boring, which is the opposite of beauty or decorative. So anytime you have a highly repeated motif, now this can happen also in nature. For instance, if you're painting a tree that has a whole bunch of similar branches, then according to me, according to this rule, you need to invent or come up with several different tricks or techniques for rendering those marks. You can't just do them all. Like for instance, I did this window. I did the vertical marks with this credit card. On this window, I did it with a paintbrush, and now I'm with dark paint on my brush. I'm painting up to the mullion. So I'm reverse painting or negative painting, not painting the mullion. I'm painting the shapes between it. All right, and there's very likely to be, in fact, other tricks that before I'm done. Typically, on a repeat like this, I would guess that I would use 4 or 5 different techniques: brush, palette knife, scratching, reverse painting. There's 4 right there. And again, that's a general principle. Highly repeated motif must be painted with various techniques, approaches, tools even. Don't just use a brush. Use, oh, by the way, I'm painting with my right hand way too much because I got stuck holding a bunch of brushes with my left hand. So let's remedy that real quick. By the way, even painting with your opposite hand, almost, maybe it does count as a separate technique, because your left hand makes different marks than your right hand. Or you left-handers, of course, you turn that around, right? You guys have to struggle to paint with your right hand if you're left-handed. Here's an interesting principle I have found. Most left-handed people tend to be more ambidextrous than their right-handed counterparts. I think it's because early in life they were pushed toward right-handed before they grew to an age that everybody figured out they were left-handed. Anyway, so that's just my little private theory that doesn't matter. Oh, this is a very ratty brush. I didn't realize how ratty it was. Somebody told me a couple weeks ago that this is a synthetic brush. They told me that if you stick that in the hot water, that it will be fixed largely. And I did that with a bunch of brushes and found that about 2/3 of them that actually did work. So that was a happy discovery. How hot? Well, I just pretty much for me, hot out of the tap is not nearly hot enough. We have one of those hot water, like for making tea, you know, a little electric carafe that heats up the water to boiling. I heated the water in that, poured it into a bowl or a cup, and fairly quickly after that dunked these brushes into synthetic brushes we're talking about. Don't do this with real sable, and don't do it with bristle. This is just the synthetic, because they get those little hairs, you know, they splay off at the ends. Anyway, about 2/3 of the brushes I did that with, it actually was quite successful. So there's a little tip for you. So I'm doing a lot of mussing and fussing today, and that might mean that I'm just not in my sharpest painting mind. I don't think that's it. I will not yield on that point. Or I'm just in a frame of mind. I'm sitting down, by the way. That does make a difference. I tend to fiddle more if my legs aren't complaining, if I'm more comfortable. I have to be careful about sit-down painting, because it causes me to slow down and get finicky. So that might be exactly what's going on right now. But be that as it may, as I've been jabbering to you guys all this many minutes, I'm crawling my way little by little across the face of this building, and I am getting pretty happy with it. And I guess one of the things that would be good for you to see is that I'm going back and touching it, or hitting it, so to speak, again and again and again. I'm painting with my fingers right now. I always feel compelled to say, don't paint with your fingers. But then I want to say, yeah, I don't have any cobalts or cadmiums on my palette, so I don't have any toxic pigments. Or I truly wouldn't paint with my fingers. I don't know if those pigments really cause cancer, or do they just cause cancer in California? Is my head right in your way? Almost. Not quite, huh? Hello, Ajit. Ooh, good to have you watching from India. Thank you very much. And Dominic. Good, you wrote your pledge down. Good. Thank you, thank you. Good for you. Hello, Marcus. Hello, light blue. Those of you who are on Facebook, this is Daily Art Adventure number 889. I started on Facebook just over 3 years ago, and then I got kicked off. That's a long story, I won't repeat it here. But I did get kicked off for 2 months, 60 days. At that moment, I went over to YouTube, where I had 10 times more followers anyway. So there's a small cadre of Daily Art Adventure friends that we have been meeting nearly daily for some of us for 3 years. So that's explains some of the expressions. Oh, I'm driving myself crazy because I'm holding a whole bunch of brushes in my left hand, which is just a habit. And then I end up not painting with my left hand, which, whew, as you can see, after a while, it drives me nuts. That's nuts with a K. That's worse than being driven nuts. Going nuts is really bad. I've talked a lot about painting with two hands, so I don't want to get into it again right now. But other than to say, when I paint with my left hand, I feel like I'm painting better, and I think there's something to that. I don't think it's entirely my imagination. I think I tap into a more intuitive part of my brain. So I invite you painters to join me. Many of those marks, like the scratch that I just made, they must be done spontaneously. You can't really premeditate. You can't stick out your tongue, think, and then go. At least I don't think you can, because it looks contrived. It looks fakey. It looks. They really are, if you will, as spontaneous as they look. It's hard to describe. One of the ways I try to describe it is I say I give my hands permission to paint without my permission, or I give my hands permission to make marks without my carefully premeditated, planned out brain being involved. All right, just one more thing I'm going to say before by the way, I'm getting pretty happy with this. You can see that the lightest light is up here. As we crawl this way, it's getting in shade. I'll do a little bit more light over here, but again, it'll be still this general and darkening as we go down. I'm going to go back to the subject of interesting marks for a minute, which is the term that I use most often to describe the decorative element. In my title today, I called it riveting, or interesting marks, beautiful marks, decorative marks. Interesting is the term that I use the most. And if you've been watching for the last several minutes, you've seen several times where my hand was actually shaking, wiggling, jiggling a little bit. And okay, here's what I know about you, many of you early journey painters, those of you who are still early in your painting journey. You get mad at yourself when your hand does that. You're frustrated, and you think that a good painter, that his or her hand doesn't do that. And I want to, first of all, disillusion you of that illusion. That is not true at all. In fact, the good painter, rather than beating his hand into submission, quote unquote, forcing it to hold still. By the way, that's why a person holds a brush like this, because they're angry at their hand for wiggling. Anybody? You don't have to admit it, but anybody, does you recognize yourself? I'm describing a lot of you. I know I am. Sorry, I know who you are. You get mad because your hand wiggles and jiggles, and again, you think that good painters don't have that problem. Oh, my heart breaks every time I talk to an older person, and frankly, more often than not, it's an older woman. He says, "Oh, yeah, I used to paint, but then I got to my hand. Now, anyway, I got to my hand shakes too much. I can't paint anymore." And I go, "Oh, doggone it." Now, it may be true. It may be truly true that their hand does paint too much. But I would think about 80% of the time when I hear that, it's no. It's not that their hand shakes too much. It's just their hand shakes more than they wish it did. And they feel like they don't have control. So anyway, look at Rembrandt's paintings. Man, his hands, and he died at 60, my age, 64, 5, 6, something like that. He didn't even have time to get old, like most people back then didn't. Anyway, his hands clearly was shaking. But there's not an art critic on the planet who doesn't think that Rembrandt's old age paintings don't kick the heck out of his young man paintings. I mean, you know, I'd be honored to have a young Rembrandt painting or do a young Rembrandt, but his young man paintings don't hold a candle to his old man, bad eyesight and hand shaking painting. All right, now, so the essence of good painting is making interesting marks, right? That's, again, one of my mantras. I say that over and over and over again. The essence of good painting is making interesting marks, the sine qua non, without which nothing. If you don't got this, you don't got nothing. And as a painter, you've got to make interesting marks. And the essence of interesting marks is variety. But it's really hard it's so intuitive to get a handle on this interesting thing. I don't know what people could say to me, rightly say to me, "Oh, I hear you say that, but I just don't know what you mean by interesting marks." And it's a good question. You do well to be confused because it's very intuitive. But one of the simplest answers to that question is interesting marks is the marks that your hands make when you're holding the brush in the right manner. In fact, look here I am, even while I'm talking. Look at the end. Can you see the end of my brush there? I'm not struggling to control it. I'm just holding it normal. Look at that. Now, can I hold it stiller than that? I just diminished it. You cannot hold your brush still. Let me give you some encouraging words. First of all, give up on this myth that you can hold a brush still. You can't. Why can't you hold a brush still? Some of you have heard this before. Why can't you hold a brush still? Doggone it, it's because you got a heart that's beating. Quit complaining. As I like to say, the day will come when you and I and every other artist we know will flatline for eternity. Boop! At that point, you'll start drawing a straight line. I'm being obviously facetious. Plus, anyway, I'm only talking at a certain level because I don't really think I'm going to be dead forever. But anyway, that's another story. You can join me in if you want in my outrageous optimism faith, be that as it may. The reason you can't draw a straight line is because your heart is beating. Quit wishing for a heart that doesn't beat, would you? Stop complaining at your hand that your hand wiggles. Everybody's hand wiggles. All right, so back to the subject at hand. What is the best way to, how can I describe, how can anybody describe what is an interesting mark? What doth an interesting mark make? And the answer is, an interesting mark is the mark that your hands make when you're holding the brush the right way, which is any way except this. Now, again, some of you know, yeah, but you did that last week when you're doing portraits. Check, guilty. And as soon as I get as good as John Singer Sargent, I'll stop that too. But I'm not that good yet. So I still hold, when I'm doing hyper-realism, or I don't really mean hyper, but when I'm doing real tight realism, like on a small portrait especially, of course I hold my brush in that way. But that's not because I'm a great portrait painter. That's because I'm a mediocre portrait painter. And by the way, if you want to see my mediocre portraits, I stand by them. I'm being a little bit smug here because I honestly don't believe my portraits are mediocre, at least not compared to most people. So you understand. As mediocre as they are. Anyway, stop being mad at your hands for shaking. Celebrate it. And it is your hand. When your hand shakes, your hand is trying to help you be a good painter. All right? So work with it. Work with it. Stop fighting against it. Down here, there's this little wrought iron railing, kind of a faux porch here, kind of like a little Parisian, wrought iron railing. So I definitely want to capture that nice little detail on that building. Again, this is the most important wall, if you will, in the whole painting. And do you see that brush wiggling? Okay. I'm not irritated in the least. See that brush wiggle? Now when I lay it down on the brush, on the canvas, and it gains some stability, of course. But even though that's where, for most of you, that's where good painting lies, is in that natural. Now this is what I'm doing right here. Look, this is not a good stroke. I'm going to make it look good. But why? Because that's a hyper control. But it's followed by a whole bunch of non-hyper control, okay? The essence of good painting is making interesting marks. I want this building to look like this building. There it is. There's my painting. But way more important than likeness, looking like, I want this building to be jaw-dropping, gorgeous, and it's not realism or similitude that gives me that jaw-droppingness, right? It is the essence of the marks themselves. That's what makes it beautiful. And that's, as you can see, I mean, that's what I'm working so hard on. That's why I keep going back over it till it all looks good. Okay, did you see that crazy stroke right there? Yeah, right there when I made that. Unpremeditated. Like I thought about doing it about a half a second before I did it. And in that half second was my opportunity, because if I thought it for another half second, it would be too late. It would be premeditated and contrived. Now, the good news is, I do like it. I don't like all of it. So again, here's this parachute. So I'm going to just wipe off some of it up there, blend that in. Now, that much of it I like. And again, I'm driving you realist people crazy, saying, why'd you do that? That's not in the photograph. What is that supposed to be? Is that a, whatever. Wrong, working out of the wrong side of your brain, right? Now, let me just do way back here at the top now. I can add more light that I didn't feel free to do early on, but now I do. All right, I'm going to stop there. To stop broadcasting. Thank you, all of you, for your chats. Hello, Gail Knowles. All kinds of artists watching me here today. I appreciate it very much. Frenoki, Flatline for Eternity. Glad you got a kick out of that, my friend. Thank you. Yes, of course. Light blue, you're exactly right about a malt stick. Oh, and you know what? I actually have a literal malt stick. Upstairs last week, I was using one of these long handled brushes that aren't made anymore. Too bad. We talked about that last week a bunch. So here's a real malt stick. Boy, I bought one years ago for doing portraits. This one is like I feel like a pool shark, you know? You know, a man is a serious artist when he brings his own malt stick to the pool hall. Isn't that nifty? By the way, anyway, there you go. I remember I got that 20 years ago. I don't use it very often, but by golly, when I want it for portraits, there it is. All right. Enough of this nonsense. Thank you, guys. I'm going to paint by myself for a little while. I know it's a lot of nerve to paint, for me to paint without you. How can you do that? How can you do that? I can. I'm going to stand up for a while. Oh, here's a tip. Here's a good tip before I leave. So I'm kind of burned out on this building right now. It's like, in fact, so much so that I almost feel like going and, doing something else, like practicing my trumpet or something for a while. Go get a snack or something, right? Here's a good tip. Forgive me, you don't need, you're smart enough to figure this out, but instead of doing something else, just go paint somewhere else. Maybe I'm in the mood for sky now, or in the mood to come over to this. Just do something very different. I've been focused here for way too long. I'm happy with what's going on here. Oh, by the way, one more quick tip. I did bring down a T-square, to make sure. I did guidelines over here before I started broadcasting to make sure with lines this long. And I was very close, but not dead on. So let's check over here. How about this building? Oh my goodness, that is I'm surprised. Very close, maybe dead on. Wow. Actually, I did that one just by eye. Anyway, is that bragging? I don't think that's surprise. I'm not bragging, I'm just surprised. All right, do you see all the glow happening off? That was a lot of that was added today, right before I started broadcasting. So that really is there. That was added late in the process. Now I'm doing that crazy, breaking the rules, unconventional pencil thing. I think that's a little bit too much up there. I keep saying I'm gonna go, then I keep painting. Okay, all I'm doing, I dried off this brush. It still has wet paint on it, but I just cleaned it, wiped off the excess, and I'm just messing up a little bit. Yeah, it was too. There we go. And I like that stroke, that spontaneous, but there's just a little bit too much of it, so I'm just push it back a little bit. There, that's perfect. That's perfect. I'm not sure this line right here is The perspective is not right. Doggone it. Now I really do need to quit broadcasting because I'm gonna. And if those lines are off, then for sure this mullion line is off. Sorry, hang on here. Just a little quick rescue before I go. I'll be working on it, of course, after I stop broadcasting. And then, of course, this line must be off. I would have caught that just as soon as I stood up and backed up from the painting, which is essentially what just happened, isn't it? I stood up and said, "Wait a minute. There's perspective that's off right there." I'm like the preacher that says, "Just one more point." Some of you who didn't grow up going to church, and you missed out on that little bit of life. That is, being preachers who say, "Just one more thing," and then they go on for another 10 minutes. That's what I'm doing right now. I was trained well. All right, I'll double check that too. All right, I'm trying your patience. Thank you all for your company. Yeah, exactly. Michael says, do trees for something different. Great idea. Great idea. Exactly. Get away from the straight line, geometric, architectural. Yep. All right. I do hope to broadcast again more this afternoon. I fully expect to do that. I'll be surprised if I don't. So, again, if you've rang that bell, then you'll get notified when I start broadcasting. All right. Thanks, guys. Love you. Bye.